So about Brad, Anu was kind enough to bring Brad to us. She had seen him talk somewhere else. He's had 20 years of experience in a wide variety of roles, not typical path I've seen. Web development into lean manufacturing, into business analysis, Scrum mastering, and then found a love in agile coaching. He's got agile certifications galore. He is the creator and host of an Agile for Agilists podcast. And he's a frequent speaker on agile topics. So he comes locked and loaded and ready to talk about tonight's subject, which is the velocity trap. Take it away, Brad.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. I'm not used to the intro, so I love it. Cool. So let me steal the screen. I don't use Zoom a lot, so I apologize.
That's all right. We'll nudge you back on the rails if you go too far into the weeds.
Can everyone hear me okay too? Mic-wise, it's
Audio's good to me.
Perfect.
What's your usual delivery mechanism?
As far as virtual?
Well, yeah, not using Zoom.
Oh, well, so I just came from Insight, and at Insight, we're a Microsoft shop. In fact, they're one of the top partners of Microsoft.
Those Teams or something?
Yeah, mostly Teams. But I guess I can jump right into this. I recently started at Ford, which is a little bit of a dream come true for me, as a huge process nerd, and as a native-born Michigander, who currently lives in Ohio. So I live in the enemy's land, if you know anything about Michigan and Ohio.
That goes beyond football.
Yes. Lots of disputes over the years, yes. It goes all the way back to an argument over this little strip of land between Ohio and Michigan, and it's where we got the nickname Wolverines, because of how rowdy we were. So yes, it's a huge sin to my family that I moved to Ohio, but I'm all about networking and getting to know people, and so it's worked out fairly well for me. But I did recently start at Ford. A lot of people don't know. I'm actually working on my next article is going to be kind of about the history of Ford's assembly, right? Their assembly line. A lot of people relate like flow and the elimination of waste to Toyota, which Toyota did do a lot of refinement on that, and they did add a lot to it. But Ford was kind of the original, and it even predates him, Olds and all of them. But as you mentioned, I count my software/agile experience here. So 15 years there. I did start in lean manufacturing, not necessarily by choice. I don't know if anyone starts in a factory by choice, but that was kind of where I was at. I come from a long line of factory workers, and I've now worked for 6 different Fortune 500 companies. So I'm a little afraid that I've typecast myself to be stuck in the Fortune 500 world. I guess time will tell. And yes, I have way too many certifications. Insight is a Scrum.org partner. They also offer other classes like Lean Change and Fast. And so I got to take all these for free. And so I was like, well, I'm going to take advantage of it while I can, which is good. Thanks. I'm not there now. So yes, I have tons and tons of certifications. But this is what I usually say are like the things that I'm supposed to convince you make me important, so that you'll listen to me. That's kind of like the stereotypical guidance with a presentation, which I absolutely hate. What I find much more interesting is what you've kind of already highlighted, is that like I have a broad spectrum of experience, or as David Epstein calls it, a range. I have a range of experience and skills, which sometimes makes it hard for me to stay in my box, depending on my role and my situation. But I believe that it allows me to think in ways and draw correlations across different disciplines and different industries in ways that people don't typically think. And with that, these things in this slide, some of it's based on lean manufacturing, some of it's based on me as an agile coach, me as a scrum master, some of it's based on being a product owner and a BA, and some of it's based on design. And so kind of pulling all these things together and my experience as well as my research led me to this path. I also normally give this in person, so it's meant to be a little bit more interactive. I'm not just going to talk at you the whole time. I do enough of that with the podcast. So hopefully you all will be ready to have a conversation with me. So cool. All right. So to kick us off, I have this wonderful quote by Lord Kelvin, very famous inventor, who said, "To measure is to know. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it." Now, this quote actually is not true. You're typically advised to not start with a false quote. However, I think that it's a great lens to kind of look at things. And when I say it's not true, Dr. Deming has taught us that we can improve without measuring it. But the reality is, how do we know we're improving if we're not measuring it? And so measurements are in our business world, our sense, right? Like you can't smell or feel. You can kind of see, I guess, the release of products, the release of value, the release of software, but metrics are really your sense. The problem with metrics, though, is that they only highlight where you shine them. So like a flashlight, or in my case, a lantern, because I didn't find a free picture of a flashlight and I thought it looked more artistic. But the reality is, whether you have a flashlight, whether you have a lantern, you have to point them in the right direction. And this is where I see a lot of organizations and companies struggle, is they either just try to like blanket measure everything, and then like they don't really know what they're looking at, or the reality is that they tend to measure the wrong things. I'm going to open chat to kind of watch that as well for comments. Cool. All right, so for the sake of this presentation, we're really going to talk about two different types of measurements or metrics. They're referred to as outputs and outcomes. This presentation was originally called Outcomes Are Greater Than Outputs. And it's a fun little, I don't know the specific rhyme term for it, but output and outcomes sound very similar, so it's easy to remember, but that makes it very confusing for people. Right? And so they're like, well, outputs, outcomes, what? It sounds the same. So when we're talking about outputs, we're really talking about productivity, right? And it's a measurement of productivity. When we talk about an outcome, that is the result of your outputs. What is it that I'm trying to accomplish with these outputs? When we think traditionally about America and organizations, output was really the main measurement that we tend to use. And a lot of companies today still use it. And the idea was that of consumerism is that if I produce enough products, someone will buy it. The only barrier to someone buying my item is it being available. And so that's something that stores typically use. Like in this instance, manufacturers, their whole goal is, how do we get things on the shelf? If my shelf looks full, people will buy. In fact, if you ever worked in retail, which I spent a lot of time at Meijer, and I will reference them a lot for two reasons. One, they did a lot of things right. And two, I don't have an NDA, so I can share them. And if you're not familiar with Meijer, they're a Fortune 500 grocery company from the Midwest, from Michigan, similar to Kroger or Walmart. But yeah, so the idea was that if I produce more...
That Fred Meyer by chance?
Yes, yep.
Yeah, the one that we see, I've seen it in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, I don't know if that is the same then. So Fred Meyer was the original founder. I'm not sure on the store Fred Meyer.
Yeah, anyway.
So yeah, so when I was in the factory, for example, we used parts per person per hour. PPPPH, lots of P's there. And the whole idea was, how many parts could a person in an assembly line make within an hour? We call them cells. They're more like a cage. They weren't like a line, but same concept. And we'll talk a little bit more about the differences. However, I want to start with asking the audience a question. This is one of those parts where you get to speak up. Why are businesses in business?
And to clarify, do you want the cynical response or do you want the idealistic one, Brad?
Whatever comes to mind first, or what you think most people would say.
I'm going to say to make money.
Make money.
Make money. Yeah. I mean, that's the first answer that I pretty much always get. Yeah, in the chat. Yeah. You know, dollar bills, or in this case, Canadian bills, because once again, it's free. What was available to me for free. Yeah, that's our first thought is, you know, to make money. And unfortunately, a lot of Fortune 500 companies have gotten to this point where all they seem to care about is profit. But the reality is that when companies start, they didn't start because they wanted to make money. And I don't buy from a company because I want them to have more money. And I don't work for a company because I want them to have more money. Right? The reality is that companies start to fulfill wants and needs. They're trying to solve a problem, whether that is solving a need, like being able to provide food for someone, or it's fulfilling a want, like an automobile at the time. Now you could argue it's a need depending on where you live, right? Or toys or entertainment or any of that stuff. The whole point is to provide a want or a need. Right? It's not just to make money. If you go into business just to make money, you're going to struggle. And so for the sake of this presentation, you know, when we talk about value, value is something that we throw around a lot, and it means different things to different people, right? What is the value to my company? What is the value to my customer? What's the value to my employees? Right? It means a lot of things. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to say value equals demand. Right? If there's a demand for it, it's valuable. And because quotes make everything more true, I have here a quote. The consumption is the sole end and purpose of all production, and the interest of the producer ought to be attended to only so far as it may be necessary for promoting that of the consumer. Now, this definitely sounds a little bit old-timey. Does anyone know who said this quote?
That's not Adam Smith, is it?
You are the second person ever to get this right in like 3 years of me giving this presentation. So kudos to you. It was the father of capitalism, which throws a lot of people off because we tend to think of capitalism equals money hungry companies or stakeholders. But the reality is, you know, companies, their original purpose was to serve. Now let's talk about Amazon for a minute. Pretty sure everyone's heard of this company at this point. And one thing, whether you agree with all their decisions, you know, there's maybe moral obligations, but the thing that they've always done very well is they've always looked to their customer. For those of you that remember when Amazon started, moving into the digital store realm from their book selling, they implemented this thing called 2-day shipping, free 2-day shipping. A lot of us think of it as free. It's not really free. We pay for it, and that's your Prime subscription, but they would love for you to think it's free. And a lot of economists at the time and financial people were like, this is insane. They're spending money faster than they can make it. This is coming out of like the dot-com bubble where it was more about growth than actual profits. And they're like, this company is never going to last. There's no way. All right. Fast forward, you know, to I believe it was 2022. Over 50% of online purchases were purchased on Amazon. So I think they're doing pretty well for themselves. And, you know, Bezos has off and on been the richest man in the world. Right? He's made billions. And so the point is that they focused on customers, arguably to a fault, when it comes to their 2-day shipping. Does anybody have any guesses how much they spend on shipping per year?
Is that before or after I mean, they're trying to be able to get themselves towards as little profit as possible.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, like not necessarily like after their costs, just what do they spend? And then that's actually what's taken out of their revenue.
Let's say 5 billion, and I'll be wrong.
You're
right.
probably not that far off.
Any other guess?
I was going for billions, but how many billions? Five might be a little conservative there. Yeah.
83.5 billion.
Oh, there we go.
In 2021, it was 76.7 billion. Their operating income was 25 billion.
Mhm.
So they spend a lot on shipping. And this year actually updated these at the beginning of the year. The 2022 stats weren't out yet when I updated this. If I remember in 2018, it was closer to 20. So like it definitely has been growing very fast. And we all know what happened in 2020 to cause such a giant spike there. But they spend a ton on shipping. And the reason they do it is because they know that that's what customers want and now expect. Thinking back to my time at Meijer, the grocer, this was I don't know, 2016-ish timeframe. And that was when companies started doing delivery to people's houses. And these were small, like little startups, third-party companies like Blue Apron, that would basically scrape companies' sites and put their stuff on their site, and they would add a markup to it. And then if you ordered from their site, they would go to those stores, pick it up for you, and bring it to your house. Well, Meijer saw this trend growing, and they realized there was a demand for it. And they tried to do curbside for a little bit. It wasn't the most profitable for them. But then what they ended up doing is they partnered with this company called Shipt. That's with the T at the end. They basically, what they did is they invested in that company's ability to shop within the Meijer store if they shopped Meijer first and foremost. If it was something Meijer provided, they had to shop from there. If it wasn't, it was free game. And so they invested in APIs to make it easier for their website to get accurate data. They invested in applications for the people picking the orders within the store to be able to fill the orders faster and more efficiently. And yet Meijer made no money, no extra money off of this, I should say. They made the same amount of money that they would make if you came into the store and shopped yourself. And the reason they invested in this is because they saw the need, they saw the demand, and they wanted to stay relevant, and they wanted to give people what they wanted. All right. So the big three, if you're not from the Midwest, Ford is one of them. I just mentioned. GM is another. Fiat Chrysler is the third.
Stellantis. They keep changing their name.
Yeah, I can't keep up with them. And they keep buying and selling. But yeah, so these big three are the automotive companies that kind of won out, I would say, the Industrial Revolution of the early 1900s. Ford was the first to bulk manufacture, but by the 50s, GM had really won the race by all accounts. In the 60s, they sold 50% of all cars sold in the US. Right, so 50% of all cars purchased in the 60s were from GM. It's a dominant footprint. And the thing that they knew was that cars were a luxury item. And people bought them to be able to add luxury to their lives, whether it was reducing travel time to enable more time, whether it was to show off your slick wheels. Right? The whole point of it was, how do we make this thing feel luxurious? And that's why we have like the beautiful fins from the time in the cars and like the cool paint jobs and all of that. Well, one of the things that they didn't do a great job of is keeping up with the competition and keeping an eye on customer needs. And so you had companies from Europe and Asia that were able to bring cars to America and show consumers you're going to have the same style, the same luxury, but higher quality. And then you throw in, some government regulations that also, made them have to kind of switch on the dime to make cars safer. And they really floundered. And as of 2022, 17% of cars sold in the US were sold from GM. They're still the number one seller of cars in North America, but 50% to 17% is a huge difference. Another cautionary tale that people usually groan because they're tired of hearing about Kodak is Kodak. And I learned a lot about Kodak in a book by Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game that I didn't know. And so I felt like I had to add it into this. And one of the things that I didn't really know, like I knew that Kodak started to make cameras more accessible to the masses. That was their whole point. Cameras were very expensive. They were something that professionals had. And so really their claim to fame was making small, affordable cameras that any family could have. Well, what I didn't know is that they actually invented the first digital camera. Now, we all know that they went out of business because they couldn't keep up with the digital camera. However, the reality is they invented it, and their board members decided that it would conflict with their film business. So like, why would we ever release something that would make it so we sell less film? That's a bad idea. Put it on the shelf. And then Nikon released the first digital camera with their patent. So if that's not a kick in the teeth, I don't know what is. All right. So those were some cautionary tales, a couple success stories. So let's talk about, how do we decide what to build? And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to leverage what's known as the innovation sweet spot. And in the innovation sweet spot, you have this Venn diagram where I put desirability at the top because I find that most organizations tend to think about viability first, right? Like, can I afford this and what return am I going to get on it? I remember sitting as a BA and later a product owner and thinking like, oh man, if people would only buy this thing, I would make so much money. And it's like, wow, that's a really wrong way to think about it. But that's how a lot of people naturally think. Desirability is the first thing. People have to want it. If they don't want it, it's a waste of your time to even invest in it. And then I would argue the next is feasibility. Is this something that we can actually create? Well, if you work in IT, anything is possible. So the reality is this something that I can reasonably create in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable amount of investment? And as I mentioned, viability is the last one. Once you hit all three of these spots, you've hit the sweet spot. And I guarantee you there's enough work that fits within the sweet spot that you're never going to run out of work. There's always enough. But I want to pause for a minute and look at some of the common metrics that we see in the industry today and ask you, do these metrics align to the innovation sweet spot?
Brad, before you open it up, you want to just clarify the difference between viability and feasibility?
Yeah, viability is the investment on the company and the return on investment. Feasibility is our ability to deliver this.
You can build it, and then the other viability is more like, can we afford to do this?
Right.
Yeah. Not the physically can we do it.
Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
Right. Can we do it? And can we afford to do it? And then desirability is, should we do it?
Yep.
Yeah. So name of this presentation, the velocity trap. I have to start with velocity. So does velocity tell you if something is desirable, feasible, or viable?
No. Not even looking at your product.
What about a burn down or burn up if you're one of those positive people?
It means you did the thing.
It could relate to the feasibility, but it's not a metric of it.
Potentially, yeah. What about if it's on time?
That's the wrong thing. It doesn't matter how quickly it got there.
Well, it does
Correct.
if you're needing to be
I
first
mean,
to market.
yeah, if you're meeting the market, there's that one thing, but it's not something you want to consistently say is your metric.
Not the most
Yeah.
important thing.
I mean, the reality is fast follow-ups have a lot of times won, right, in the end.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go right through the triangle here, on budget, in scope. Are those going to tell us if it's desirable, feasible, or viable?
In scope might push it out of viability, if it's out of scope, then it's pushing it out of viability.
Well, that could push it out of feasibility.
That too. Yeah.
Budget could push it out of viability.
Potentially.
but it's not, neither of them is complete unto itself. They're not enough of a metric to tell you to answer those.
Other folks are welcome to unmute as well. We're just
Yeah.
chatty Cathy's over here.
I'm seeing in the chat too, Nawaz is saying scope is viability and feasibility. And then the last one I revealed here is code coverage. Does code coverage tell you if it's viable, feasible, or desirable?
Can we have a definition?
How much of your code is being tested?
No, but it's important. That's a painful one for me.
So-
Yeah,
Can I make a comment, Brad?
yes, please do.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not on video, but all of these metrics that you're highlighting are execution metrics, not outcome metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And you are putting together the innovation wheel, or the triangle of innovation, as I call it, as outcome based. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a difference between execution and outcome. And unless we start looking at the outcome metrics, which would be based on the product or solution we're building, you won't get to the sweet spot.
Exactly. I'll send you your check in the mail.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and the reality is organizations tend to look at their customers like this. However, most of us do not feel that way. Right? So how do we know, right, what is desirable to our customers? Right? How do we know what the outcome is that we should be measuring? Well, the first thing we need to take into account is called the false consensus effect. And it's that you are not the user. So you will never truly know what the user wants because you are invested in this item, this solution, whatever it is. You're invested in it, so you will always have a different lens. You know, thinking back to my time at the Fortune 500 grocer Meyer, the CEO and the head execs, VPs, they all shopped at the Meyer grocery store. In fact, they probably had nightmares that somebody would snap a picture of them shopping at a competitor. And so they would say like, hey, I'm a customer, I shop here, you know, and that was kind of a pride thing. But the reality is that your average customer, whether at Meyer or Walmart or Kroger, they don't go into the store with the same lens of, oh, if I buy the company brand item, it's going to cost the company less, right? Or we're going to make more, or any of those sorts of things, right? As well as your average customer at the grocery store isn't making exact money, right? So they think about things differently. So the reality is you are not the user, no matter your involvement within a product. So really how we know what people want is we observe them super creepy like from a mile away with binoculars. Hopefully a little less creepy, but the idea is that we do want to observe our users. You know, a lot of people think, oh, we can just ask people what they want. But the reality is that people will tell you one thing, but they will demonstrate a different action. And so if you just ask somebody what they want, they may say, you know, hey, I will only shop at your store if you had VR headsets at all the doors and I could look at the store virtually. And so we invest a bunch of money into VR headsets. And the reality is that like the novelty wears off, people don't stay there. Right. So what we really need to do is really need to observe how are they using our products? How are they going into our stores? You know, how are they using our service? And those things will tell us what we need to know as far as what we should be building. With that said, there are certain things you can ask, and those are things that there's no way to know through observation. Right. So if it's like, you know, what brought you in today? Why did you visit my website today? What do you do for a living? Like some of those things, there's no way that you could tell from observation. But first and foremost, we really do want to observe them. Yeah, and as Edward said, ask questions, but not direct one. There's a whole art around asking questions and observability. There's an entire field dedicated to it called user experience. It's scientifically backed. Not something I am trained in. I will often say I'm a designer, not a UX expert. So lots of respect to them.